To the top story this hour, voting for the parliamentary elections in Sri Lanka is underway at over 1,400 polling stations across the island. Voting commenced at 7 a.m. and will go on till 4 p.m. local time. Over 17 million voters will choose from 8,800 candidates vying for 225 parliamentary seats in a proportional representation system. Sri Lankans will casting their ballots in a snap parliamentary election today, months after electing a Marxist-leaning president in the Indian island nation's first elections since the 2022 economic meltdown and political crisis. We may tell you that the election was called by President Anurakumara Dissanayake, who won the September election after blaming the country's traditional wing, the ruling elite, for the economic collapse that led to the country defaulting on its loans. And for more, we have Dr. Ahmed Moyun Faruqi joining us. Well, Dr. Faruqi, as the polling has started, how is the polling going on and how significant is the voter turnout for today's election?
Lepakshi, very good morning to all of our viewers across the world. Yes, Sri Lanka is now witnessing another election in the span of just about 2 months. We had presidential elections in September, and today we're having the parliamentary elections across the island. You talked about the interest with regard to all the voters in Sri Lanka. Yes, people are thronging to the polling stations across the island, and I'm right now just outside one of the polling centers here in Colombo, where even the Prime Minister, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, is shortly going to visit here for casting her vote. People have been thronging to the polling centers since 7 a.m. in the morning. However, it has been informed that there is a possibility of some weather related issues in certain parts of the island, which is why people are anticipating that some amount of voters might turn up a little earlier than the usual. That's one. However, secondly, at the same time, it has to also be remembered that traditionally parliamentary elections witness lesser turnout as compared to the presidential election. We had seen a turnout of around 78 to 80% in presidential elections this time. People are anticipating that about 5 to 6% of fall would be expected in these elections as well. That said, it needs to be seen till later today by around 4 p.m. How many people would actually come out, and we will keep updating all our viewers with regard to how the polling progresses in the entire island. Lepakshi.
All right. Dr. Faruqi, also one of the most significant elections, of course. Tell us the significance of these elections and how they could affect Dissanyake's political vision for the country.
You see, Prof, you're absolutely right. These are elections which will have a lasting impact with regard to how the government of Anurakumara Dissanayake will go ahead over the next 5 years. He would require a parliamentary majority to push forward with his reforms that he had promised during the campaign, both at the time of presidential elections as well as during these current parliamentary elections. That said, it is very important for NPP to not just muster a simple parliamentary majority, but also they would be looking forward to get a special majority of 2/3 to bring in constitutional reforms. That's something which people have been talking about, analysts have been talking about, while at the same time, we also have to remember that this will also be a make or break kind of a moment for certain opposition parties. We also remember that political landscape in Sri Lanka has changed over the last few years. From 2015 to 2019, Sri Lanka Freedom Party was in power as in the form of President Maithripala Sirisena's government. Now today, we do not see the Sri Lanka Freedom Party in the among the front runners in most of these elections that we have seen this year. That said, in addition to that, I also have to mention United National Party that also is on the sidelines. At the same time, Sri Lanka Potujara Peramuna, which was the ruling party in 2019's elections, was brought down to about 3% of the vote in the presidential elections held this year. So we need to see how SJB and the New Democratic Front would pose a challenge to the ruling NPP in this election. Lepakshi.
All right, Dr. Faruqi, also with Sri Lanka facing, of course, ongoing economic difficulties, what's next for Sri Lanka's turn to the left?
You see, it's a very, very difficult task with regard to challenging circumstances like the economic crisis. And efforts were made by the previous President Ranil Wickremesinghe and his government to put the economy back on the course of recovery. Along with that, we also have to remember that the IMF deal was struck in 2023, and thereafter, Sri Lanka has had certain austerity measures which were applied. All to the public discomfort, and there was considerable, resistance from several sections of the society. Now, the new government will have to traverse through how to go ahead with the reforms while at the same time maintaining a balance between IMF's commitments as well as taking care of how they would how take forward the reforms as they had promised by reducing tax rates as well as reducing the electricity and various other fuel tariffs which they have mentioned. And this is something which people have been looking forward to. And most likely these measures would be discussed and debated once the budget proposals will be presented in the parliament, and for which they require a parliamentary majority in the island. Vipakshi.
All right. Also, Dr. Farooqui, what are the key issues that you think that the voters are going to prioritize today in today's election?
Actually, 2 years back, Sri Lanka had witnessed, the peak of economic crisis when there were serpentine queues before petrol stations, before grocery markets, and various other places. And Sri Lanka had come to a grinding halt. From there to now, the inflation has come down considerably. I mean, it was 70% at the peak of the economic crisis. Today, the inflation is in minus terms, and that's it talks about how much efforts were made by Sri Lanka to come back to normalcy. In fact, such similar steps would have been taken in other countries, and we have seen certain examples where countries have taken about 5 to 10 years to come back to normalcy. However, Sri Lanka has done so in 2 years span. Now, if we talk about the important, the discussion topics which had been during the campaign as well as the run-up to the election, that had been one of the most important agenda points for all political parties as well as the people, as well as the voters. So the recovery from the economic crisis, which even now currently it exists. In fact, if we have to talk about the economic crisis, the external debt still exists, and the repayment of that would start only from 2029 onwards. So Sri Lanka is not yet completely out of the woods. It's still on the knife's edge, and it continues to remain so. And this is where the new government, whichever will get the majority in the parliament this time around, will also have to plan with regard to how Sri Lanka would come out of the economic situation. And this is something which people had been very, very vocal with regard to talking about. And that has been the central idea with regard to how Sri Lanka needs to plan for the coming 5 years' time. Vipakshi.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Farooqui, for all those details. And we'll keep taking an update from you throughout the day.